Hello, my mother works in an office and I've been hearing stories like this since I was a child. This isn't just a story for the sake of use, there's a lot of truth and real life in it. I want you to recognize yourselves in it and not repeat other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and addresses in this story are fictional.
They were cheering like they'd won the lottery. The whole conference room was pulsing with champagne burps and back pats, like we'd all been handed the same golden ticket. Phones were out, bonuses being read aloud like wedding vows. I hadn't opened mine. Not because I forgot, because I had a feeling. You learn to trust the knot in your gut after enough boardroom beatdowns dressed up as celebrations. I was halfway to the elevator, already picturing the cheap dinner I'd pretend to enjoy later with coworkers who used words like grateful and blessed while the execs flew off to Aspen, when I heard heels clicking too fast behind me. "Hey Lisa, just a sec," the HR girl said. Meredith or Madeline or something with fake eyelashes and an HR degree from a YouTube ad. She looked nervous, clutching a manila envelope like it might explode. "We noticed a $72,000 adjustment on your bonus," she said, softly, like whispering it made it less real. "It's probably nothing. Probably just a miscalculation in the bonus pool logic." "Is that so?" I said. Didn't raise my voice, just took the envelope. Inside, no greeting, no salutation, no "thank you for your years of service." Just a clipped stub with my name, the reduced amount in red ink, and a line in courier font that read, "Subject to correction." No initials, no timestamp, like they were daring me to eat it and smile. Listen, if you're enjoying the story so far, do me one quick favor. Tap that like button and subscribe. 97% of people who listen to these stories never do, and it really helps the team keep digging into these kinds of twists. Thanks. I folded the paper, tucked it back in the envelope, and didn't say a word. I think that rattled her more than yelling would have. I saw her blink, like she'd braced for a scene and didn't know what to do with my silence. That's corporate, isn't it? They expect you to beg for scraps, so when you just walk away, it screws up their script. What they forgot, what they always forget, is that I helped write that script. 10 years ago, before the ping pong tables and kombucha taps, I was the one who built the damn architecture they now call legacy systems. I remember meetings in storage closets and payroll being scribbled on napkins because QuickBooks kept crashing. We were 4 people and a whiteboard with a crack down the middle. Back then, we couldn't afford base salaries, so I offered to defer. I worked nights, slept on couches, and signed an agreement that structured performance compensation not off revenue, but delivery milestones I personally managed. We called it Schedule C. It was buried in the Series A documents like a tick, silent, small, and hard to notice until it bites. I wrote most of it myself. My initials are on every page, so are the founders and the CFOs. But none of that mattered in that hallway. Not in that moment. All they saw was a woman in a tailored blazer walking toward the exit with an envelope and no visible reaction. No fuss, no drama, just quiet. But inside, I was already lining up the pins. Because what they slashed wasn't just a bonus. That number, that specific number, it triggered something else. Something they forgot. Something I didn't. Let them toast their spreadsheets and clink glasses in front of interns. Let them think they'd pulled one over on the woman who used to bring in her own office chair because the startup budget didn't include lumbar support. Let them forget. I hadn't. And I never do. The year we built the first prototype, we were running on takeout containers and blind faith. Our headquarters was a crumbling co-working space next to a vape shop that constantly set off the fire alarm. There were 4 of us. 1 founder, 2 engineers, and me. I was the only one thinking long-term because somebody had to. Payroll wasn't a real thing then. We called it stipends to sound less broke. My first paycheck bounced, second one too. By the third, I stopped depositing them and just told Zach, the founder, to track it as deferred comp. Not because I trusted him, because I trusted the paper, and I drafted that paper myself. They were too busy arguing over font choices in pitch decks. I was the one who added the equity clause, Schedule C tied not to revenue goals but to delivery milestones, infrastructure built, systems deployed, failovers tested, Real engineering, not vanity metrics. Most folks back then just asked for options. I asked for structure. Performance-based, non-revocable, retroactive if certain thresholds were crossed. I knew they'd forget. That was the point. Schedule C was buried on page 78 of the Series A binder. Nobody reads that far unless they have a reason to. I made sure I'd have one, eventually. And of course, the signatures were all there, sloppy and rushed. Mine was clean, theirs looked like drunk scribbles, but valid. That night, during the final doc sprint before closing with the VC, I watched them sign without reading. Zach was riding a high from the term sheet. I was holding a Sharpie and a clause they'd never revisit until it cost them. I remember the exact wording. Should architecture milestone thresholds exceed 90% fulfillment within a fiscal year, deferred compensation shall convert to performance equity retroactively at a rate no less than 2.25% undiluted. Legalese, sure, but clean. Airtight. I even got it notarized at the 24-hour UPS store because I didn't trust anyone's memory, not even mine. In the years that followed, the company grew bloated on burn rates and buzzwords. New faces showed up. Directors of this, VPs of that, all fluff. None of them knew I'd practically lived in the Jenkins dashboard during the first year, duct taping together an architecture that still carried 80% of our traffic today. They thought legacy code meant obsolete. To me, it meant leverage. So when that envelope came with a chopped bonus and a shrug of indifference, I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I didn't even sigh. I just reached for the folder I'd kept untouched for nearly a decade, the one with the signed vesting framework, milestone certs, and the trigger language printed in triplicate. This wasn't a mistake. It was a move, a calculated one. Someone had poked the numbers, thinking nobody would notice a 72K cut. Someone upstairs assumed that memories fade, files vanish, and women like me just move on when undercut. They were wrong on all three. This wasn't the first time they tried to adjust something and hoped silence would stick. But this time, they didn't just tug at a number. They brushed up against the clause. And that clause wasn't just about money. It was about ownership. And I'd been patient long enough. I sat at my desk, the envelope still unopened on the corner like it was daring me to react. But I'd already done my reacting, 10 years ago, with a fountain pen and a clause nobody remembered existed. Now, it was time to move pieces. I opened my inbox and typed 3 lines. No salutation, no context. Please cross-check against Schedule C of the Series A documentation, specifically subsection 3B. I added the scanned bonus stub, clicked send, and didn't bother watching the cursor spin. Most people would have stormed into someone's office, slammed a door, made a scene, demanded a meeting. I'd learned by now. The people who win don't yell. They document. And they wait. 2 hours later, a response landed from the CFO's account. Subject line blank. Body text. Let's discuss this. Privately. Cute. The kind of vague, tense wording you use when you know you've stepped in something but aren't sure how deep it goes yet. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the compliance archive, the internal vault where we stored policy frameworks, audit trails, and decision logs. Most employees didn't even know the subfolders existed. I did. I'd helped write the access protocols back when we were still pretending our security team was more than a guy named Josh who forgot his password twice a week. I uploaded the original signed Schedule C packet, scanned from my personal records. I tagged it under compensation governance, nested it in equity structures, legacy, and applied the flag we only used in cases of active noncompliance, visibility escalation. It was our internal tripwire. The kind of tag that doesn't notify a person, it notifies a process. That process, once pinged, quietly forwards a summary to legal, compliance oversight, and the internal audit team. No fanfare, just quiet alerts sent in the dead of night to people who hate surprises. By morning, it would be logged, time-stamped, and included in the weekly compliance review packet. No need for me to explain anything. The documents would do the talking. I poured myself a stale cup of coffee from the kitchen no one cleaned anymore and went back to work like nothing happened. Code still needed pushing. Vendors still needed approvals. Just another Tuesday with a little less glitter on it. What most of them didn't realize, what they still hadn't grasped, is that the trigger had been baked into the foundation from day one. Not just in the clause, but in the behavior it represented. You can build your house on top of the system, ignore the beams and bolts, But if you ever try to tear it down and forget what holds it together, well, eventually the weight shifts. I didn't need to shout. I had already whispered in the language they actually fear. Documentation, audit flags, and governance alerts. They could pop bottles upstairs all they wanted. The real story had just started writing itself. And the next chapter was going to be very, very quiet. It started with a calendar update, then another. The quarterly audit call, normally treated like a dentist appointment with mandatory attendance, got rescheduled. Twice. No explanation. Just a vague conflict with CFO availability dropped into the invite like a paper towel over vomit. Then the Slack pings started. Quiet ones. People I hadn't heard from in months dropping into my DMs with curious little questions masked as concern. Hey, did something change with the bonus cycle? Any idea why audit's doing a second pass? LOL, did you see the folder called Key Personnel Review? Sounds intense. I played dumb. I'm excellent at that when I need to be. But the real tell was what I didn't hear. The CFO? Silent. No follow-up to his let's discuss email, no requests for context, just ghosted. Which, in his case, meant he was trying to plug holes faster than they were springing up. What he didn't know was that the moment I uploaded Schedule C into the visibility stream, it had triggered a log trace. Every time someone opened, copied, or referenced it anywhere inside the internal server, got recorded. And from the read receipts I could still access, someone had opened it 17 times in 24 hours. And then, just like magic, a new envelope appeared on my desk. Different font, different header, the kind of formatting legal actually touches. My name, the full bonus amount reinstated, and one cheerful line at the bottom. This revision reflects the final calculation. Final. What a word. Makes it sound like they'd tied a neat bow on something, as if we weren't standing in the middle of a house that still smelled like smoke. I didn't sign it. Instead, I opened the PDF in preview, annotated the bottom with one sentence, and re-exported it with my name still missing from the signature line. Final approval contingent on retroactive equity per Schedule C, no pleasantries, no bolding, just truth, clean and surgically delivered. See, they thought reversing the number would make me go away. Classic bluff call. Let's fix it before she sues. But that's not what this was about. That $72,000, that wasn't a bonus. It was a line in the sand. A threshold that triggered the very clause they had buried and forgotten. The clause that gave me 2.25% retroactive equity on a company now valued at just over $190 million. They gave me back crumbs. I asked for the bakery. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't me hoping they'd do the right thing. This was me holding a notarized agreement signed by 3 C-level execs and daring them to tell me it didn't matter. They couldn't. Not anymore. The minute that query hit the compliance officer's desk, titled Unapproved Compensation Modification, Key Personnel, the issue stopped being internal politics. It became a liability, something the board would demand answers for, something investors would flag as risk, something audit firms would put in bold. I was no longer just a name in a payroll row. I was a line item in their risk report, and that meant leverage. They didn't know yet how far I was willing to take it, but they were starting to suspect. And suspicion in corporate culture spreads faster than truth ever could. It was a Saturday. I remember because I was half buried in laundry and half attempting to not think about the mess upstairs when my phone buzzed. Signal, not email, not Slack, not Teams, Signal, the kind of app you use when you want the conversation to vanish into smoke. Board chair. First time he'd ever contacted me directly in 9 years. I'd seen him at quarterly reviews, fundraisers, and once in the parking garage where he asked if I was in sales. That was the extent of our relationship. Message was short. I thought your bonus was fixed? I stared at it for a second, then typed back without even pausing to think. It was never broken. No ellipses, no emoji, just that. There was a pause, maybe 5 minutes, probably him weighing whether to escalate or back off. Then another ping. Would you be open to a brief call? That was when I knew the CFO had folded, because the board chair doesn't step in unless someone's already said the phrase, potential exposure. I didn't respond with a yes. I sent him a secure folder link titled Schedule C Documentation Archive. Inside, PDF scans of the original signed Schedule C appendix, notarized milestone verification forms, bonus calculation breakdowns from the Series A framework, and a cover letter I had written in calm clinical language. I had also included a screenshot of the timestamp from the compliance archive where the document had been reflagged and opened 17 times in one day, just in case they needed to cross-reference who was trying to quietly patch this with duct tape. And at the very bottom of the email, one line, not bolded, not capitalized, just placed. If you'd prefer to settle this publicly, I'm happy to provide context during the investor Q&A. No threat, no legalese. Just a polite reminder that the Q&A at next Thursday's investor roundtable was open mic, and I still had access to the Zoom link. It hung in the air like humidity. I imagined him reading it, imagining me walking investors through how one of the company's founding engineers was getting her equity shaved with a dull blade, how she documented it, raised it, and been ignored, until someone upstairs realized the audit trail ran both ways. If there's one thing board members fear more than lawsuits, it's reputational rot. And nothing rots a board faster than the phrase retroactive equity clause being whispered outside their curated echo chamber. Still no reply that night. But the next morning, someone from legal emailed me a calendar invite for clarification on compensation documentation. 8:00 a.m. sharp, with 2 other names copied I hadn't seen since the Series A sprint. I clicked accept, said nothing. I didn't need to argue, or threaten, or beg. They were finally coming to me, because I wasn't just holding a folder of old documents. I was holding the original architecture of their house, and the blueprints proved I owned a piece of the foundation. Now they had to decide what was cheaper, honoring the past, or having it read aloud in front of people who write checks for a living. The emergency session was scheduled for 6:30 a.m. Pacific time, which meant they expected half the board to be dialing in from cars, airports, or corner offices with their lights still off. These were people who paid assistants to read their emails and only showed up when words like exposure, compliance, or equity clawback started hitting their inboxes with enough velocity to cause concern. The invite came from legal. The subject line was dry. Audit clarification regarding key personnel compensation. But the attendance list? That told the real story. Every major stakeholder was there. Every partner, every vesting entity with skin in the game and sandwiched in the middle. Me. I logged in 5 minutes early. Muted. Camera off. Let them spin. The CFO opened with an apology laced in hedge words. There appears to have been a clerical oversight. Certain frameworks were constructed in an earlier stage of the company's life cycle. Language could be interpreted multiple ways given the evolving nature of our cap structure. He was sweating through a button-down that looked too tight. Voice calm, but teeth too white. That CFO tone you hear when someone's used to spinning numbers like plates and praying nobody checks the fine print. I waited. Let them fumble their own narrative first. Then the general counsel said my name. Lisa, would you be willing to clarify your interpretation of Schedule C? I unmuted. Sure, I said, and pulled up the document like I was sharing a recipe. No drama, just architecture. Schedule C isn't vague, I began. It outlines performance equity retroactivity triggered by architecture milestone thresholds. 90% met within a fiscal year activates 2.25% undiluted equity, retroactively applied. I clicked to the milestone verification sheet, each one signed, dated, logged. This chart, I said, highlighting in blue, reflects delivery thresholds for the last 4 quarters. 93.8%. Silence. I clicked again, bringing up the signed copy of Schedule C. This was executed 9 years ago. My initials, the CFO's, and Zach's, the founder, notarized and timestamped during Series A. Someone on the board unmuted, but thought better of it and muted again. And the $72,000, I said, pausing just long enough. That wasn't a bonus. That was a trigger. The threshold that converted my deferred comp into equity. It wasn't a gift. It was a clause. The chair finally spoke. Is this enforceable? I didn't even blink. Already is. I was just being polite. It landed like a gavel. No shouting, no demands, just clarity. A knife sharpened on paperwork they thought no one remembered. The CFO leaned forward then, blurting something about ambiguity, shifting language, and the intent of the agreement being misunderstood in today's context. But I didn't respond. The point had already been made, because the clause didn't care about context. It cared about conditions, and every single condition had been met. The only thing still floating in the air was shame, and I didn't need to stick around to stir it. The chair wrapped up the call fast, thanking everyone, promising further discussions offline. Legal stayed behind, of course. They always do. I closed the window, took a breath. The house of cards hadn't collapsed. It had folded neatly, just enough for them to realize who had been holding the corner piece the entire time. And I hadn't even raised my voice. The internal announcement came at 8:04 a.m., sandwiched between a Slack reminder about flu shots and a memo about new kitchen snack policies. After 7 years of service, our CFO will be stepping down for the personal reasons. We thank him for his contributions. No fanfare, no farewell tour, just a cropped headshot and 3 polite paragraphs that might as well have read, "Don't ask." No one did. He was gone by lunch, his office cleared out so fast it looked staged, like a crime scene cleaned just enough to confuse the jury. The framed photo of his dog, still on the desk. That's how quickly they'd moved. I didn't smile, didn't clink any coffee mugs. I knew better. Moments like that aren't victories. They're cauterizations, quiet, necessary and slightly nauseating. The real work came 2 days later. I was called into a closed session with the board. No CFO, just the chair, 2 internal counsel reps, and 1 outside firm I hadn't seen since the acquisition scare back in 2018. It was quiet, cordial, focused. "I'd like to propose a clean reissuance of all equity logs," I said, sliding the draft across the table, reflecting performance clauses that were historically neglected, revised in full alignment with Schedule C precedent. No one pushed back. The chair nodded. The lawyers took notes. One even mouthed "smart" to himself when he saw the formatting tags in the appendix. They knew this wasn't about me anymore. This was about patching a leak that could turn into a flood if anyone else went looking through old paperwork. We agreed on a timeline. Internal counsel would draft a memo, audits would run through the rest of the schedule appendices, and legal would revise the employee equity dashboard to reflect tiered triggers. I left the room with nothing in hand but the feeling of something shifting. Subtly, like weight redistributing on a frozen lake. By Thursday, the whispers had started. VPs were texting former coworkers asking for copies of their onboarding packets. Legal got 3 separate requests for review of original incentive documentation. And the HR team, who had spent the last 5 years treating equity like a party favor, were suddenly locked in conference rooms for hours at a time. By Friday morning, it had a name. Pulling a Schedule C. I heard it while pouring coffee. 2 junior analysts at the machine, one whispering to the other like she'd discovered the Rosetta Stone. I swear, just ask legal for your Schedule C. Apparently, it's a thing. It traveled fast. Faster than I expected. People didn't even know what it meant exactly, just that it sounded like buried treasure, like a code you could whisper and the system would suddenly open for you. Of course, most of them didn't have one. Schedule C wasn't standard. It had been a one-off, a relic of the company's barely legal startup days. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that now the company had to behave like it might be in there, for everyone. Meetings got longer. Emails got more carefully worded. HR stopped using the phrase performance discretion in bonus letters. It was like the entire place had been put through a silent compliance detox. No drama, no upheaval, just a gentle, unavoidable reset. Not because I'd asked for it, because the ledger had spoken. And for once, they listened. A month passed like smoke under a door. Quiet, constant, impossible to ignore. There was no official notice, no headline announcing the shift, but the temperature of the company had changed. Fewer hallway jokes about bonuses. More people actually reading the attachments HR sent. You could feel it in the way people paused before speaking, like they were measuring their words for weight and auditability. And then came the quarterly all hands. Same conference room. Same polished concrete floors that looked expensive but echoed too much. Same catering trays of dry bagels and plastic tubs of fruit that always made a show of being locally sourced. Same folding chairs arranged in neat rows, none of which ever felt comfortable no matter how you sat in them. I walked in a few minutes early, not on purpose, just out of habit. And that alone was enough to shift the air. Someone in the front row, VP of product, I think, glanced over, nudged the person next to her. Conversations paused. Not dramatically, but noticeably, like someone had turned down the volume knob on the room. I didn't flinch, just kept walking, eyes forward, posture relaxed. The CEO was already up by the podium, flipping through the slide deck about company growth and roadmap updates. I used to help build those decks. Now I just watched them happen. Someone halfway down the aisle stood up and motioned for me to take their seat near the front. I smiled, shook my head. "All good," I said, and kept walking to the back row. Let the new folks sit up front. Let them drink their coffee and nod through the graphs and fake laugh at the CFO jokes. Well, the new CFO. The one who hadn't learned yet that being liked in a room doesn't mean being remembered in a lawsuit. I took my seat in the last row, crossed one leg over the other, watched. The company looked different now, younger in some ways, older in others. There were fresh faces up there giving updates, people who'd been hired after the dust had settled, blissfully unaware of what Schedule C even was. I didn't blame them. I hoped they never had to learn the hard way. The room clapped politely after each section: marketing, growth, platform stability. I caught 2 or 3 execs glancing my way during the numbers slide, subtle, like they were checking to see if I'd blink at something out of place. I didn't. They'd learned, or at least they were learning. After the applause died down and the cookies were brought out, still stale, I stood and made my way toward the door. A few people made eye contact, nodded, not performatively, not out of obligation, just acknowledgement. Reputation's a funny thing. You don't rebuild it by shouting. You just show up quietly when it matters. You let the system correct itself and the story write its own ending. That day, I didn't need a mic or a slide. I didn't need a seat at the front or a title bump or a public apology. I just needed to walk through the room and let them remember why things felt different now. It came in like any other memo. No fanfare, just a plain text email from legal with the subject line: updated policy review protocol. No bold, no red text, no exclamation marks. Just a quiet update from the shadows that run the place. All compensation adjustments must be reviewed against legacy agreements predating Series B funding. It read. That was it. 1 sentence. But it might as well have been chiseled in stone, because everyone knew what it meant, and more importantly, who it meant. No names were mentioned, no retroactive apologies or mea culpas, just a line drawn, cold and precise, with all future errors now officially filed under preventable. You could feel it settle over the office like dust after a controlled demolition. Every department head I passed that morning looked like they were pretending not to reread their own contracts. Even the VP of Ops, who once told a room that clauses are just guidelines, had gone suspiciously quiet in meetings. By noon, legal had quietly rolled out a sub-policy titled Legacy Agreement Cross-Check and began combing through anything over 5 years old, just in case. HR's shared drive was locked for review. A few directors started mentioning the word governance in casual conversation like it was new vocabulary. And I kept working. No victory lap, no speech, just a full inbox and a code release to push. That afternoon, I had to drop off an updated security badge authorization form, which meant walking past HR's corner cubicles, the same hallway where, weeks earlier, I'd been handed that bonus envelope like a traffic ticket. She was sitting there, the HR rep who'd flagged my adjustment. Her screen dimmed as I passed. She looked up. Our eyes met for just a second. I didn't smile, didn't stop, just gave one nod. Firm, steady. She nodded back. That was enough. It wasn't about her anymore. It never really was. She was just reading from a script she didn't write. Most of them were. But now, the script had changed. Quietly. Permanently. Upstairs, legal would spend the next month building new compliance workflows. HR would hold contract literacy sessions they'd frame as professional development. And the board? They'd make sure nothing like this ever happened again, not because it was the right thing to do, but because it was now provably expensive to overlook. I'd be in none of those meetings. I didn't need to be. The work was already done. They thought they were shaving a bonus. Turns out they triggered a vesting clause, and I'd been holding the ledger all along.